"Get out of my restaurant, you black thief!" The words hit like a bomb in the upscale dining room of the Ivory Spoon. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations froze. Every elegant head turned toward the young waitress standing by the swinging kitchen doors. Maya Elise Carter, 22 years old, her apron soaked with sweat from another grueling double shift, stood motionless, clutching two small styrofoam containers filled with leftover food. The man shouting at her was Edward Langston, the 55-year-old white manager of the restaurant, his face contorted with rage, fingers stabbing the air toward her chest. "You think I wouldn't notice? Stealing food to feed alley trash behind my back? You're done. You hear me? Done!" Behind Maya. The door creaked open slightly, letting in a breeze and the faint sound of footsteps. Two children waited there in the alley. Jamal, 12, and his little sister Aisha, 9. They weren't beggars. They were orphans, hungry, forgotten, and cold. Maya had seen them 2 nights ago, curled up behind the dumpster in silence, watching kitchen staff throw away trays of untouched food. She hadn't thought twice. She had wrapped up the extra chicken and mashed potatoes and quietly slipped it to them after her shift. She didn't tell anyone, not even her daughter, Amara, who waited at home wheezing through another asthma attack. But Langston had found out. And now, under the chandelier light and linen-covered tables, he made an example of her. The containers slipped from Maya's hands. The food hit the polished floor with a soft, sickening splatter. Gasps echoed through the room. A woman in pearls whispered, "Why's she even working here?" Another shook her head. But Maya didn't cry. She didn't defend herself, not when Langston ripped off her apron, not when he shoved her through the staff entrance and slammed the door behind her. She dropped to her knees beside the children in the alley, brushing mashed potatoes from their cheeks with a trembling hand. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You'll eat tonight." That moment, humiliating, raw, unforgettable, would change everything. If that moment made your heart pound, this story is for you. Welcome to the channel. Here, we tell real-life inspired stories that uncover injustice and celebrate those who rise above it. If you believe kindness matters more than cruelty, please hit like, and if you want to hear the rest of Maya's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after this video ends. August 1st, 2024. The roar started as a low hum just after sunrise. Then it grew, louder, sharper, until the entire street vibrated. A sleek silver helicopter descended over a quiet working-class neighborhood in South Atlanta, sending dust, leaves, and yesterday's mail swirling through the air like confetti. Kids ran outside barefoot. A man dropped his coffee cup in the driveway. Phones came up fast. Every curtain on the block twitched open, but in the center of it all, inside a modest brick home with peeling white shutters and a cracked front step, Maya Elise Carter stood still. At 47, she wore simple jeans and a gray t-shirt. Her hands were still damp from scrubbing pots. Her back was straight, her eyes sharp, steady, and impossibly calm. Watched through the window as the helicopter touched down in the vacant lot across the street. The blade slowed. A side door opened. 2 silhouettes stepped out into the dust and light. Maya didn't blink. She knew who they were. She had always known this day would come. 25 years earlier, Maya had just graduated from Clark Atlanta University with a master's degree in accounting. She should have had a desk job, an office, security. But life had other plans. Amara was 4 years old, diagnosed with severe asthma that required weekly treatments. The bills were relentless. So Maya worked. Mornings as a maid at a downtown hotel. Evenings at the Ivory Spoon. She slept when she could, ate what she could afford, and always made sure Amara had what she needed. The night she met Jamal and Aisha, something shifted. They didn't ask for help. They didn't beg. They just waited silently behind the alley dumpster, hoping, Maya didn't ask who they were or where they came from. She just fed them. Again the next night. And the next. Until Langston caught her. After he fired her. He spread rumors. Called her a thief. Told other restaurant managers she was unstable. And made sure she couldn't get hired anywhere in the service industry again. Maya took what work she could find. Handing out flyers on corners. Washing cars. Cleaning bathrooms at an office building on Auburn Avenue. Amara's asthma got worse. Public clinics meant waiting hours for medication. Every dollar Maya earned went to inhalers and ER copays. Then, one afternoon in 2000, she walked past the Peachtree Elite Club, one of Langston's favorite spots. She stopped in the shadow of its grand balcony and heard laughter above her. She looked up. There he was, Langston, laughing with investors, cigar in hand, saying, "She's crawling in the gutter where she belongs." Her blood turned to fire, but she didn't shout. She didn't cry. She pulled out the worn journal she carried everywhere and wrote one line. "You broke me in public. I'll rebuild in silence." What Langston didn't know was that Maya had been listening back in 1999, when Ivory Spoon managers whispered about ghost employees and tax write-offs. She remembered everything. In 2001, she got a night janitor job in the building that housed Langston's private accounting firm. Nobody noticed her. She was just the cleaning lady. But she noticed everything. Falsified invoices, duplicate expense reports, racial pay gaps. Late at night, when no one was around, she copied ledgers, photographed documents, and pieced together what would become a 300-page dossier. By 2003, with help from an old college friend named Lena Huang, a forensic accountant, Maya had what she needed. She was ready to strike, but not for revenge, for justice, for Jamal, for Aisha, for Amara. Now, 25 years later, the helicopter was here. Maya stepped out onto her porch, heart steady. The two figures walked toward her, one tall, in a tailored navy suit with worn sneakers, the other in a gray skirt suit, heels clicking softly on the pavement. They stopped in front of her. No one said a word. And then the man spoke, voice warm and low. "Miss Carter, we've been looking for you." Maya didn't need to ask. She already knew. The children she once fed were no longer children, and they had come back, not empty-handed, not forgotten, but bearing something that would change everything. After that humiliating firing in the summer of 1999, Maya Elise Carter's world unraveled faster than she could catch her breath. Edward Langston, still seething with self-righteous fury, made sure to ruin her name across Atlanta's restaurant industry. He told anyone who would listen, managers, chefs, owners of other high-end venues, that Maya had been stealing food, branding her a thief and a liar. His words carried weight, not because they were true, but because he was powerful and white in a city where quiet prejudice often hid behind Southern smiles. Within weeks, Maya found every application she submitted rejected. She knocked on the doors of smaller diners and cafes, but one by one they turned her away with fake smiles or phrases like, "We're not hiring at the moment," behind closed doors. Langston's poisonous gossip spread like wildfire. Maya, with her master's degree in accounting, found herself unable to land even the simplest job waiting tables. She scraped by with whatever she could get, washing cars in the Georgia heat, handing out flyers on busy corners, and cleaning office buildings after dark. Her savings, already thin, evaporated. Amara's asthma attacks grew worse during the muggy nights, and Maya spent hours in crowded public clinics waiting for doctors who barely had time to glance at her child. Sometimes, she would sit on the cold plastic chairs of Grady Hospital at 2 in the morning, watching Amara's tiny chest rise and fall, praying her baby would make it through another night. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that Maya realized no one was coming to save her. She would have to save herself. Langston, meanwhile, thrived on his own cruelty. At the exclusive Peachtree Elite Club, where Atlanta's wealthy elite sipped expensive scotch and discussed expansion deals. Langston bragged about making an example out of Maya. "She thought she could steal from me," he told a circle of restaurateurs, his cigar smoke curling in the air. "Now she's crawling in the gutter where she belongs." One warm afternoon in 2000, while delivering flyers for a local car wash, Maya walked past the iron gates of the Peachtree Elite Club. She froze when she heard laughter drifting from the second-floor balcony. Looking up, she saw Langston, leaning back in a leather chair, glass in hand, laughing with two investors like the world belonged to him. "She's a thief," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She'll never be anything more." Maya's hand tightened around the stack of flyers until the corners bit into her palm. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't shout. She didn't throw anything. She didn't even look away. She simply stood there, letting his words carve themselves into her memory like scars, because she knew one day they would fuel her fire. That night, after putting Amara to bed in their cramped one-bedroom apartment, Maya pulled out a small leather journal she'd bought from a thrift store. She opened to a clean page and wrote, in bold, deliberate letters, "You will remember my name," underneath it. She added a second line, quoting her late mother's voice that echoed in her mind, "Turn pain into something unstoppable." It was the first time in weeks that she felt a flicker of hope. She remembered conversations she had overheard while working at the Ivory Spoon, whispers of off-the-books contracts, payroll discrepancies, and cash payments that never showed up in the ledger. She remembered the tired looks on the faces of black kitchen staff who were paid 60% less than the white servers out front. She remembered Langston laughing about tax loopholes that sounded a lot like fraud. Maya realized something. She had knowledge, skills, and a memory sharp enough to piece it all together. And so, she began. In early 2001, Maya took a janitorial job in the same downtown building where Langston's accounting firm kept its offices. It wasn't glamorous. It paid barely above minimum wage, but it gave her access, every night, while pushing a mop across glossy tile floors. She listened. She learned. She watched what documents were left on desks. She noticed what files were thrown carelessly into shred bins. And slowly, carefully, she began to gather evidence. She brought a disposable camera tucked into her cleaning cart and, when the halls were empty, she would snap photos of suspicious invoices and financial reports. She would copy numbers onto scraps of paper and hide them under her uniform until she got home. At first, it felt terrifying. Once, she nearly got caught when a security guard came back early from a smoke break, his flashlight beam sweeping across the office just as Maya crouched behind a filing cabinet, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. But when he walked past without noticing her, she smiled to herself in the dark. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. By late 2001, Maya had a stack of notes, but she needed help turning it into a case strong enough to take down Langston's empire. That's when she reconnected with Lena Huang, a Taiwanese-American forensic accountant and old college friend. Lena was everything Maya needed, sharp, fearless, and disgusted by corporate greed. When Maya showed her the documents, Lena's eyes widened. "Maya, this isn't just fraud," she whispered. "This is a corporate death sentence." Together, they spent the next 2 years building a detailed 300-page dossier that documented Langston's crimes. $15 million in tax evasion, ghost employees on the payroll, systematic wage discrimination, and shady offshore accounts in Panama. Every time Maya felt tired or scared, she thought of Jamal and Aisha, the kids she hadn't seen since they were sent to a foster home 200 miles away in rural Georgia. She had tried to visit once, but the foster care system, riddled with red tape, told her she had no rights and no connection. The thought of those children growing up forgotten, just like Langston wanted her to be forgotten, only hardened her resolve. "I'm going to make him answer for what he's done," Maya told Lena one night. "Not just for me, but for everyone he's crushed." Langston, of course, had no idea what was coming. He continued to strut through Atlanta's elite circles, flashing his money and pretending his empire was untouchable. He laughed at the notion that anyone, let alone the young black waitress he had humiliated, could ever challenge him. But Maya was patient. She was strategic. And in the quiet hours of the night, as she sat at her kitchen table with her journal, her notes, and her vision, she began to write not just about revenge, but about a future she would build from the ashes. She wrote of the day her name would no longer be whispered as a warning, but spoken with respect. She wrote about Jamal and Aisha, hoping they were safe. She wrote about Amara, promising her daughter that one day they would never have to scrape by again. And with every word, Maya's pain transformed into power. By the beginning of 2002, Maya Elise Carter had transformed her quiet rage into relentless focus. And every late-night shift as a janitor became a chess move in a game only she knew she was playing. She no longer moved through the marble-floored hallways of Langston's accounting firm with dread. She walked with purpose, with her back straight and her eyes scanning every trash bin, desk drawer, and copy machine tray for the next piece of evidence. What began as desperate acts of survival had evolved into a cold, calculated campaign to bring down the man who publicly destroyed her, and who had, in his arrogance, underestimated her completely. She remembered everything, how Langston joked with his partners about manipulating quarterly tax reports, how he boasted about hiding money overseas through consulting firms that never did a day's work, how he told a white colleague in passing, "Never promote the black ones. They're replaceable." Maya had been invisible to them, just another uniformed body mopping the floor. But she had learned their patterns, their vulnerabilities, their flaws. Every whisper she overheard, every spreadsheet she glimpsed, every number she memorized became a weapon when she returned home each night. Long after Amara had fallen asleep on their second-hand couch with her nebulizer humming quietly beside her, Maya would lay out her findings under the kitchen light and carefully log each item in a coded notebook. She didn't need to guess what she was seeing. She had a degree in accounting. She knew exactly how Langston was cooking the books. But she also knew she couldn't do this alone. It was during one of those long nights in March 2002, surrounded by papers and old takeout containers, that Maya thought of Lena Huang. They had studied together at Clark Atlanta, once pulled all-nighters cracking IRS simulation exams over gas station coffee and highlighters. Lena, now a rising forensic accountant at a private firm in Buckhead, hadn't heard from Maya in years, but when she picked up the call and heard Maya's voice, calm, low, purposeful, she didn't hesitate. They met the next morning in the back corner of a Korean cafe near Lenox Square. Lena listened without speaking for 10 full minutes as Maya laid out her story, sliding over a folder with photocopies of ledgers, payment records, and photos of Langston's ghost staff. Lena's hands didn't shake, but her face went pale. "This is enough to bury him," she whispered, "and probably a few of his partners." Over the next 18 months, the two women worked like surgeons, meticulous, methodical, and absolutely unforgiving. Lena helped Maya organize the data into a formal case file, wage discrepancies, illegal deductions, proof of discrimination, offshore routing slips, and even manipulated hiring documents that showed black workers hired at lower base pay for identical roles. Maya became fluent in forensic terms, using her journal as both roadmap and record of every betrayal she planned to expose. They bought a second-hand scanner, encrypted every file, and backed up everything on an external drive hidden in a cereal box in Maya's kitchen cabinet. Some nights, Lena brought dinner and reviewed documents at Maya's table while Amara colored quietly beside them, unaware that her mother and Auntie Lena were building the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb. By early 2003, the dossier stood at over 300 pages. Maya took a 2-week leave from her janitorial job, officially for family illness, but in reality to finalize the case and prepare for the fallout. Lena contacted 2 government agencies anonymously, then hand-delivered sealed copies of the dossier to the IRS and the Department of Labor. Within 6 weeks, a formal investigation was launched. Maya kept working, quietly, invisibly, never hinting at what was about to come. But beneath her calm demeanor, a fire roared. She had once stood in that alley behind the ivory spoon with mashed potatoes on her shoes and shame in her chest. She had once listened to Langston call her worthless, but now she held in her hands the evidence that would not only collapse his empire, but rewrite the narrative he had forced on her. The only person Maya confided in was Lena. Not even Amara knew. But in the solitude of her tiny bedroom, Maya sometimes opened that old leather journal and reread her first entry. "You will remember my name," and knew it had all been worth it. In the summer of 2003, rumors began to swirl in Atlanta's financial district. 2 IRS agents were spotted walking into Langston and Pierce LLP with sealed subpoenas. A junior accountant quit without notice. Emails were being audited. Phones were ringing off the hook. Langston, still arrogant, dismissed the noise at first. "Standard review," he told his partners. "Some disgruntled ex-employee trying to cause trouble." But by fall, the atmosphere shifted from anxious to panicked. His bank in Panama flagged multiple suspicious transfers. One of his clients was indicted in a related fraud probe. A quiet call from a DOJ investigator left Langston white-knuckling his whiskey glass at the Peachtree Elite Club, and just when he thought things couldn't get worse, it happened. On a Monday morning in November 2003, as Langston walked into his office wearing his usual smug grin and a freshly pressed blazer, he found his receptionist crying, 2 agents from the Internal Revenue Service waiting, and a federal warrant taped to his desk. "What is this?" he barked, but no one answered. Phones rang. Staff whispered. Outside, reporters began to gather, tipped off by the sudden activity. That night, Maya went to a payphone outside a laundromat 2 miles from her apartment. She fed in 3/4 and dialed a number Langston hadn't used in years. His old office line at the Ivory Spoon. It still forwarded to his personal cell. He answered on the second ring, breathless and furious. "Who is this?" Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Remember the waitress you crushed for feeding 2 hungry kids?" she said calmly. "The one you humiliated in front of strangers to feel like a man?" There was silence on the other end. Then a sharp inhale. "I've been watching you, Edward," she continued, "for a very long time." The line went dead, but Maya stood there under the flickering street lamp, a small smile on her lips. For the first time in years, she felt weightless, not because she had destroyed something, but because she had built something stronger than vengeance. She had taken every insult, every rejection, every locked door, and turned it into a plan. And now, the first stone had fallen. By the spring of 2004, Maya Elise Carter's years of silence detonated in a single morning that would change everything. At precisely 7:15 a.m., 3 black government SUVs rolled up to the doors of Langston and Pierce LLP. Engines humming like war drums. Federal agents in dark suits and mirrored sunglasses stepped out with calm precision, holding sealed warrants, folders thick with evidence, and eyes that had already read Maya's 300-page dossier cover to cover. Within minutes, The office was in chaos. Desks were being searched, computers seized, and files boxed up. Jenkins, the firm's senior accountant, was in the middle of pouring his first coffee when an agent tapped him on the shoulder. "You'll need to come with us," the man said. As two more agents entered behind him, Jenkins turned ghost white. "Is this a mistake?" he stammered. "What's this about?" But no one answered, because the paper trail told the whole story. Fake vendors, duplicate payments, under-the-table cash withdrawals, ghost employees, a full 2 decades of criminal greed. By 8 a.m., every major business publication in Atlanta had received an anonymous tip. Langston and Pierce LLP under federal investigation for fraud, tax evasion, and labor violations. Within the hour. The Atlanta Chronicle had a front-page digital article titled "Empire of Deceit: How Langston Built a Fortune on Exploited Labor," and right beneath the headline, in bold black font, was the line Maya had typed herself. "This began with a waitress. It ends with the truth." By noon, news vans circled Langston's Midtown Tower like vultures. Cameramen shouted questions. Anchors wore grim expressions. The city buzzed with disbelief. How had this titan of fine dining and finance been hiding a fraud so deep, so vicious? For so long? Langston, for the first time in decades, couldn't spin the truth fast enough. His PR firm released a brittle statement denying all wrongdoing, calling the investigation a misunderstanding driven by misinformation. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw tight, his hands shaking as he gripped a half-drained glass of scotch at his estate in Buckhead. What shook him more than the subpoenas or the headlines was a phone call that came through at 9:06 p.m. that evening. An unlisted number, static in the background. He nearly didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of him. "Langston," he barked into the receiver. There was a pause, then a calm, steady voice. "Remember me?" A silence thick as smoke stretched across the line. "The waitress," the voice continued. "The one you fired in front of your patrons for feeding 2 hungry children. The one you lied about. Blacklisted, humiliated. You remember now?" Langston didn't speak, but the faint, startled exhale on the other end was enough. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I told you I'd rise," she said, "and now you get to watch it happen." The line clicked dead before he could respond. He stood frozen in place for nearly a minute, the glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the hardwood floor. While Langston panicked, Maya remained invisible. She didn't go to the press. She didn't bask in the headlines. She went to work, quietly and strategically, side by side with Lena Huang. They formed a small consulting team, just the two of them, under the name Carter and Huang. Registered as an independent auditing firm dedicated to ethical financial investigation. At first, it was just a name on a business license. But within weeks, whistleblowers from other companies began reaching out. "We heard what you did to Langston." One wrote anonymously, "We have something bigger." Their inbox flooded. Maya and Lena met at coffee shops and borrowed conference rooms, quietly reviewing files, collecting testimonies, slowly building a reputation not as vigilantes, but as professionals with a cause. Still, Maya's focus never wavered from the one story that mattered most. She kept a framed photo of Amara, now 12, healthy but still vulnerable, on her desk, and beneath it, the crumpled drawing Aisha had once given her. A woman standing in the rain, holding an umbrella over 2 small children. "You kept us dry," the caption read, written in a child's shaky hand. But victory wasn't without pain. Just as the federal case exploded in the media, Maya was jolted back to her role as a mother. One night, Amara collapsed in their apartment after a prolonged coughing fit. The ER was packed, the air thick with disinfectant and anxiety. Maya sat beside the hospital bed, holding Amara's hand as she slept, her IV humming in rhythm with the beeping machines. A doctor came in with furrowed brows. "She needs a long-term treatment plan," he said, "and better air quality at home." Maya nodded numbly, knowing the cost. That night, as Amara lay resting, Maya opened her journal again and wrote, "This isn't just about justice anymore. This is about life." Meanwhile, Langston's empire fell like dominoes. In April, Dubai investors pulled out of a $40 million expansion deal after discovering the offshore accounts flagged by U.S. authorities. His bank accounts were frozen. A group of former employees filed a $25 million class action lawsuit citing racial wage discrimination, back pay violations, and unsafe working conditions. 3 of his restaurants failed health inspections in a single week. A whistleblower leaked a recording to the press in which Langston could be heard shouting at a manager, "Black folks don't belong in the front of the house. They're here to mop floors, not serve tables." The audio clip went viral. Within hours, his face was splashed across national news with captions like, "From fine dining to federal fraud." Protesters gathered outside his flagship restaurant, young and old, black and white, chanting, "No more lies, no more lies," holding signs that read, "Dignity isn't disposable," and "We are not your bottom line." Maya watched it all from her living room, the television casting flickers of protest onto her quiet walls. She didn't cheer. She didn't celebrate. She simply whispered to herself, "Let him sit in the silence he once forced on me." The media, desperate for a face to the story, speculated endlessly about who had exposed Langston. One article hinted at a former employee turned whistleblower. Another suggested an internal rival. But Maya stayed hidden in plain sight, walking Amara to school in the mornings, working late nights with Lena, and tending to her tiny backyard garden on Sundays. She didn't need applause. She didn't want revenge. She wanted restoration. For herself. For the kids she couldn't save. And for the ones still waiting in alleys all across the country. When asked by Lena if she ever planned to come forward publicly, Maya shook her head. "When the foundation is ready," she said softly. "When Jamal and Aisha can see what they helped inspire. Then maybe, until then, she would keep building in the shadows. Because real justice doesn't come in a single blow. It builds, slowly, brick by brick. And on that foundation, Maya was preparing something far more powerful than revenge. By mid-2004, Edward Langston's empire wasn't just cracking. It was imploding. Everything he had built on exploitation, fear, and polished deception was collapsing under the weight of truth. And the fall was merciless. The class action lawsuit from former employees grew into a legal firestorm, as over 80 workers, nearly all of them black and brown, joined the case. Depositions revealed years of wage theft, falsified timesheets, and threats against whistleblowers, health inspectors, prompted by anonymous tips and mounting media pressure, shut down 5 of Langston's restaurants within weeks. At one upscale location, they found rats nesting behind the wine cellar. At another, they uncovered mold beneath the floorboards. VIP clientele fled. Reservations dried up. Banks began calling in debts, and private lenders, once eager to invest in his expansion plans, abandoned ship without a word. The final blow came when a full hour-long expose aired on national television, narrated by a well-known anchor with a voice like steel. How power protects itself. The fall of Atlanta's restaurant king. Included was leaked footage of Langston snarling at a young hostess, calling her a mistake from a broken neighborhood, and audio of him snapping, "Black folks belong in the kitchen, not the front." The public outrage was instant and unforgiving. Sponsors withdrew from his restaurant group. A petition to have his James Beard Award revoked passed 100,000 signatures in 2 days. Protesters gathered nightly outside his last operating restaurant, holding signs that read, "We remember Maya," even though most of them didn't know who she was yet. Inside the once bustling restaurant, Langston sat in a corner booth, alone, jaw clenched, tie loosened, and hands trembling around a cold cup of coffee. As servers ignored his presence and the city he once controlled moved on without him. Meanwhile, across town in a modest co-working space, Maya Elise Carter was quietly laying the first stones of her own empire. Carter and Huang had grown beyond her expectations. Once just two women with laptops and truth. They now had 3 interns, a part-time assistant, and a 6-month wait list of ethical investors and small businesses begging for transparency audits. Maya never raised her voice in meetings. She didn't need to. Her presence, rooted in resilience and razor-sharp intelligence, commanded respect. Her name began circulating not in tabloids, but in boardrooms and legal circles. She became known not as the waitress who was fired, but as the woman who dismantled Langston from the ground up. But even in success, Maya remained grounded. Her mornings still began with oatmeal and Amara's medication. Her evenings still ended with handwritten journal entries, always signed, MC. She kept her original leather notebook, worn and fragile now, tucked inside a drawer at her desk, its pages filled with old numbers, memories, and promises, reminded her of every step it took to get here. She never stopped thinking about Jamal and Aisha, those 2 hungry children in the alley who had started this journey without ever realizing it. She had tried, again and again, over the years, to track them down, but every lead went cold. Every foster agency refused information. At times, she wondered if they remembered her at all. Still, she believed that one day, they'd find their way back, not because of revenge, but because love remembers what cruelty tries to erase. As Langston's name became toxic, his final grasp at relevance dissolved into humiliation. Investors from Dubai, once poised to inject $40 million into his restaurant group, released a blunt statement withdrawing all financial ties. The same day, his longtime lawyer resigned. Then, quietly and without fanfare, the IRS froze all of Langston's remaining personal accounts and seized 2 of his luxury properties. The once cocky mogul now found himself cashing out stocks to cover mounting legal fees. When reporters showed up at his gated estate, they found a foreclosure notice tacked to the front door. Former colleagues refused to return his calls. His face was blurred out in corporate photos he once dominated. By late fall, Langston was reduced to renting a 1-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop in rural Georgia, anonymously, bitterly, and completely alone. But the cruelest irony came not in a courtroom, not in bankruptcy, but in obscurity, because the world had stopped saying his name. The man who built his life around being important had finally become irrelevant. And yet, Maya never gloated. She didn't post online. She didn't give interviews. She declined every invitation for exposés, TV appearances, and tell-all memoirs. When asked by Lena why she stayed so quiet, Maya simply smiled and said, "This wasn't about destroying him. It was about rebuilding us." She poured her energy into her firm, but more importantly, into something bigger. In November 2004, she filed paperwork for a nonprofit initiative that had been living in her heart since 1999, a program designed to mentor, feed, and financially support youth who'd grown up in foster care, group homes, and shelters. She named it the Shelter Umbrella Initiative, after the old drawing Aisha once gave her. When asked what inspired the name, she replied, "I never forgot the storm." The press didn't know the full story, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the work, and the people it reached. By Christmas, The nonprofit had already distributed winter coats to over 300 children and launched a scholarship pilot for teens in East Atlanta. And every time Maya saw a child smile with a full stomach or read an essay from a kid who wanted to study accounting like Miss Carter, she felt something that success alone had never given her. Peace. Langston, now 80 and gray-bearded, worked behind the counter at a dusty roadside diner 3 hours outside Atlanta, where no one recognized his name and no one cared what it had once meant. He poured coffee for truckers who tipped in change and mopped his own floors at night. Occasionally, he'd catch a glimpse of Maya on the TV above the bar, her name scrolling beneath a news anchor's voice. Carter and Huang lead the way in corporate reform, or former Waitress reshapes accountability in Atlanta. He never said a word, just stared, until one day, when an older woman at the counter said, "She's incredible, isn't she? Makes you believe good people still win?" Langston didn't respond. He simply turned away and wiped the same spot on the counter over and over, his reflection distorted in the steel napkin holder. For the first time in his life, he realized what true power looked like. Not noise, not fame, but dignity, grace, legacy, and none of it belonged to him. On the morning of August 1st, 2024, as the sun rose gently over the rooftops of a quiet South Atlanta neighborhood, the sound of distant rotors began to swell, like a memory returning after decades of silence. It was a sound no one in that cul-de-sac had ever heard. Loud, rhythmic, powerful. Children ran to windows. Garden hoses dropped midstream. A dog barked wildly. The silver helicopter sliced through the sky and hovered over the vacant lot across from Maya Elise Carter's home, kicking up a cyclone of dust and leaves as it descended, its polished chrome reflecting the soft gold of early light. Inside her modest home, Maya stood by the sink, a sponge still in her hand, frozen mid-motion as she watched the storm unfold outside her window. Her face did not register surprise, only something deeper, quieter, recognition, like a song she'd heard only once and never forgotten. She dried her hands carefully, smoothed the front of her simple blue blouse, and stepped out onto the porch. Her neighbors peered through blinds and fences, but she stood calmly, eyes steady as the helicopter door opened and two silhouettes emerged. One was a tall man, sharply dressed in a navy suit with black sneakers and a calm confidence in his stride. The other, a woman in a charcoal gray blazer and heels, walked with quiet grace, her curls caught in the breeze, her posture regal yet familiar. They walked in perfect step, crossing the gravel with purpose. Maya felt her breath catch, not from nerves, but from memory. When they stopped at the edge of her walkway, she could finally see them clearly, and time collapsed. Jamal, Aisha, no longer children curled in the alley behind the ivory spoon. Jamal, now 37, had the presence of someone who had fought his way through every locked door and built his own. His eyes, still warm and wide like the boy who once said thank you without words, now held quiet command. Aisha, now 34, carried herself like a woman who had turned pain into purpose. Her gaze was steady, piercing, yet tender, like she saw the world in layers. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jamal stepped forward, his voice soft but unwavering. "We found you." Maya's lips trembled, and her hands, so often steady, so often used to build and heal, rose slowly to her face. You remember me?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. Aisha reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in wax paper, aged and yellowed. She unfolded it carefully to reveal the old drawing Maya hadn't seen in 25 years. A woman with a curly bun holding an umbrella over two small children in the rain. The lines were faint, the crayon colors faded, but it was unmistakable. We never forgot, Aisha said. We've carried this our whole lives. You were the first person who treated us like we mattered. Jamal nodded, his eyes glistening. That food didn't just feed us, it gave us hope. You gave us a reason to believe we could survive. Maya pressed the drawing to her chest as tears welled in her eyes. Not the tears of grief, but of release, of full-circle healing. I looked for you, she said, her voice cracking. They sent you so far away, and I had no way to find you. Jamal stepped forward and embraced her. Not a polite hug, not an awkward reunion, but a full, soul-deep embrace, the kind that rewrites history. Aisha joined them, wrapping her arms around both, and for a long, still moment. The world went quiet, the hum of the helicopter fading into background as 3 lives, once shattered by cruelty, found their center again, inside the house, over sweet tea and the smell of warm cornbread fresh from the oven. The stories poured out like music. Jamal had gone on to found Light Code, a tech startup that provided coding boot camps and career mentoring to underprivileged youth across the Southeast. His program had trained over 3,000 students in 6 years, many of whom were former foster kids or system-impacted teens. Aisha, against all odds, had earned a full scholarship to Spelman, graduated top of her class, and gone on to become a federal judge, using her bench to reform outdated foster care laws and push through protections for children just like the one she once was. They spoke not with pride, but with purpose. Everything we are, Aisha said, started that night you fed us. You didn't just give us food. You gave us dignity. Jamal reached into a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We want to build something together, he said. Inside was a formal proposal, the Carter Jamal Aisha Foundation, a $50 million joint initiative to create youth empowerment centers in underserved communities across Georgia and beyond. The first center, they said, would be built on the very site of the old ivory spoon, which had long since been condemned. Maya's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. She saw her name at the top of the mission statement. She saw photos of children, mock-ups of libraries, therapy rooms, scholarship boards. We want you to lead it, Jamal said. You planted the seed. Now it's time for the tree to grow. Maya couldn't speak for a long time. Her throat ached with emotion. When she finally did, her voice was a whisper. Yes, yes, let's build it. That evening, as the sun began to dip and the helicopter prepared to lift off again, the 3 of them stood in the yard, framed by the glow of a day that felt touched by destiny. A neighbor snapped a photo, Maya in the center, holding the old drawing, flanked by the 2 lives she once saved who had now come back to carry her legacy forward. Across the state, in a forgotten town with a rusted diner off the highway, Edward Langston sat on a splintered bar stool, flipping channels on a fuzzy TV above the counter. He stopped when he saw her face. Maya. Older, radiant, standing beside 2 successful professionals beneath the caption, "From Alley to Legacy, Carter Foundation launches in Atlanta." His mouth fell open. The waitress, the children. A picture he once thought he'd erased now filled the screen. The newscaster's voice echoed from the speakers. A former waitress once fired for feeding orphans now leads a foundation that will impact thousands. Maya Carter's story has captured the heart of a nation. Langston's hand shook. His coffee cup fell and shattered. No one looked up. No one cared. He was forgotten. But Maya had become unforgettable. By December 2024, just 4 months after the helicopter touched down on her street and history rewrote itself in real time, the Carter Jamal Aisha Foundation had already changed over 1,000 lives. What began as a promise forged in an alley behind a restaurant had become a national movement, one built not on vengeance or spectacle, but on truth. compassion, and deeply earned leadership. The first community center opened in the heart of Atlanta, where the Ivory Spoon once stood. The site cleared and transformed into a two-story sanctuary of light, classrooms, mentorship halls, career labs, and a rooftop garden named Amara's Sky, in honor of Maya's daughter, whose struggle had given Maya her fiercest reason to rise. By January, 7 more centers were under construction across Georgia, and dozens of public school districts began integrating the foundation's mentorship curriculum into their after-school programs. Maya, now 47, had become something she never imagined, a symbol not just of survival, but of strategic grace. She traveled from city to city, speaking not from stages in glitzy auditoriums but in church basements, public libraries, and school gyms, where she told her story not to impress, but to ignite. She spoke of invisible labor, of stolen dignity, of how systems are built to erase quiet voices, and how one act of kindness, done in silence, can echo for decades. At Harvard Business School, her journey was studied as a case in ethical leadership. At Spelman, where Aisha now sat on the board of trustees, Maya was invited to deliver the commencement address. Standing before hundreds of young black women, she spoke slowly, with poise and calm fire in her eyes. They tried to reduce me to a moment of shame, but I turned it into a lifetime of purpose. Justice doesn't destroy, it builds. That line was quoted across social media, in classrooms, on posters in high school auditoriums. It sparked conversations in corporate boardrooms about equity, silence, and power. And yet, through it all, Maya remained humble. She still lived in the same house, still wore her favorite worn jeans when she wasn't speaking, and still spent Sunday afternoons pulling weeds from her garden with Amara. Now 29 and a public health advocate with a full scholarship to Emory under her belt and an asthma-free future ahead. Maya never let the spotlight blind her, she often said. Legacy isn't about being seen, it's about what keeps growing after you're gone. And while Maya rose, Langston faded. He never appeared in public again. In a forgotten corner of rural Georgia, he worked behind the counter of a roadside diner where no one recognized him and no one asked about his past. Sometimes, late at night when he wiped tables in silence, the television above the counter would flash a news segment on the Carter Foundation. Photos of smiling children, scholarship winners, computer labs buzzing with young minds. Langston never changed the channel. He just watched, silent, still. His reflection warped in the chrome of the coffee machine, knowing deep in his bones that history had chosen its author, and it wasn't him. The story closed as it began, not with a shout, but with a quiet act of grace. On the anniversary of the first center's opening, Maya returned to the alley where she once fed Jamal and Aisha, now paved and painted as a mural of hope. She laid 3 items beneath the mural's edge: the drawing Aisha gave her, her original leather journal, and a sealed envelope containing a handwritten letter that read simply, "To whoever finds this, be kind when no one is watching. It might just change the world." Then she stood back, smiled, and walked away, not to disappear, but to keep building what no empire of greed ever could, a future that remembers the invisible, lifts the forgotten, and dares to turn pain into legacy. And that, more than anything, was Maya Elise Carter's final triumph. Not revenge, not fame, but impact that would outlive her, and remind the world that one woman with a broken heart, a sharp mind, and an unshakable will can shake the ground beneath injustice and build something better in its place. Forever. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. See you in the next one.